In today's video, I'm going to show you how to make this end grain cutting board. And be sure to watch to the very end of the video because there are several tips that you are not going to want to miss out on. Let's get started.
Now, an end grain cutting board essentially has the end grain facing up instead of the long grain. So if you've seen some other videos I've made on the channel, I've made some long grain cutting boards, I've made some charcuterie boards, all of those are long grain. This one's a little bit more intricate. If a long grain cutting board is a beginner cutting board, what we're going to do today is more of an intermediate level cutting board. So right here we have our black walnut, maple, and cherry strips laid out. I like to usually pick one color that will kind of be dominant, or one species of wood that will be dominant. For this one, it's really kind of two. I have more black walnut and cherry, and I love the two colors of those two types of wood. A little bit of maple, so the maple will kind of be like highlights. You can also, of course, throw some exotic woods in a cutting board like this. I think it really, really makes the board pop. I've actually just reordered some exotic woods, so I don't have any in the shop right now, but for demonstration purposes, I'm just kind of going on with this.
What I'm going to do now is mix up all of these boards into the order of the glue up. Now, in just a second, I'm going to tell you something very important about this glue up that will impact the way your final cutting board looks, but more on that in a second. What I did right here was I basically made, as you just saw me, a perfectly symmetrical pattern. Just a second. If you look at the pattern I just made, we have black walnut, cherry, black walnut, maple, cherry, black walnut, cherry, maple. Maple is the center, and it's symmetrical based off this. Now, what I'm going to do before the glue up is I'm going to pull this piece of black walnut. Now you might be thinking, whoa, what in the world? It's not symmetrical now. That's how we want it to be. It's gonna make sense later. Just keep watching. If I explain it now, I would not do a good job explaining it and you'd be like, huh? But basically, we don't want this to be symmetrical. Now we're gonna go ahead and go into the glue up with Titebond 3. Now, so far, the process of making this cutting board seems like most any long grain cutting board because it really has. We've cut our strips, we glued them up, we planed this down, we make sure it doesn't have any rock in it. But what we're about to get into is probably the most important part of this video because what we're going to do, it's going to seem like, oh my goodness, we're messing up the entire cutting board. But that's what makes end grain cutting boards so valuable. There's just a whole other step in the process of creating them, but I really think it makes it worth it. So what we're going to do next, I'm going to trim up some over here on the table saw, and then you're going to see me start to cut this board into strips perpendicular to the direction of our boards. So we're going to go ahead and do that now on the table saw.
Okay, so we've cut up all of these strips, and so now what you'll notice is the end grain of all of these boards are facing up. So this is really, we're starting to get a good idea of what this cutting board is going to look like. Now, before we glue this back together, what we're going to do is every other one of these strips where you're going to flip. So I leave this the same, and I flip this around. Leave this the same, flip that around. Leave that one the same. This is my favorite part of making these cutting boards. Flip that one around. Same, around, same, around, same. If you get mixed up, just look at the end. Remember how we left those ends asymmetrical? So now what we have is black walnut, cherry, black walnut, cherry, black walnut, cherry, etc. And it matches on this side as well. Quick pause, and then we're gonna keep going on this cutting board. If you could hit the like button on this video, if it's been helpful for you, or if you've learned something, I would really appreciate it. I think most people just forget to hit the like button, but it's totally free. It doesn't even subscribe to my channel or anything like that. It just helps other people find the video, and it helps me make more helpful videos for you. So, like button, it looks like this. Let's keep going. Now for this glue up, we're going to use Titebond 3. It's waterproof glue. Anytime you make a charcuterie board, a cutting board, anything that could come in contact with water, just go ahead and use Titebond 3. It's a little bit more expensive, but I think it's worth it, and this is not sponsored. What I'm doing right here is my least favorite part, probably, of making cutting boards. Well, there's always sanding too, but I'm basically getting all the glue, or not all the glue, but a lot of the glue off, a lot of the squeeze out. You want to have squeeze outs, so don't feel like I put too much glue on necessarily, but you don't necessarily want the squeeze out to dry on the board. So this isn't necessary, but this will make planing a little bit easier in the next step. So I'm just like, the glue's got to come off anyway, so take it off while it's wet. Okay, the Titebond 3 has cured, and I have taken this cutting board out of the clamps. What we're about to do is plane this board down. Now, some people are anti-planing end grain. I will say, if you make very light passes with your planer, if you have good sharp blades, it should not be a problem. You can also do this with a belt sander if you have about 20 years. You can also do it with a drum sander. I just don't have a drum sander. So there's other ways to do this, but I'm gonna do this with the planer, and it should work out pretty well. If you've never seen this before, it probably looks like a really crazy setup. What I have is this cutting board, and I have it clamped into this jig right here. Now what this jig is going to do is allow us to cut a perfectly clean edge right here, because all of our edges are none of them are straight, essentially. We have blowout back here, the glue up is not perfectly even here. So this is essentially going to allow me to reference this edge of the perfectly straight plywood to this cutting edge of the cutting board here. If you'd like me to make a video on this jig, let me know, and I can do that for you guys. I'm always here to help. So just let me know if you have questions about this, but this is just basically a piece of plywood. I have some clamps here that will hold the workpiece in place while I run it through the table saw. So a quick recap of what we just did, because this is important if you want to make sure your cutting board is square. We used our jig to clean up one edge. Then we referenced this edge against the fence to clean up the opposite edge.
Then using the same edge, the same long edge, we used our miter gauge set at 90 degrees to trim up this side and this side. And just to check yourself, you can take a square or a 1, 2, 3 block. By the way, if you want to know all the different uses for a 1, 2, 3 block, click the video that's tagged right here. But anyways, I can make sure, hey, this is 90 degrees. Come to the opposite corner and see that that's 90 degrees. And if I remember in geometry correctly, 90 degrees on this side and this side means that it is perfectly square. Right here, what I'm doing is using my palm router to put a chamfer on the edge of this cutting board. I'm not going too deep, just something to give a little bit of an accent, and I'm doing this on the top and bottom of the cutting board. We have put our chamfer bit on this cutting board, and so now we can get into the sanding and finishing of this board. Since this planing came out pretty nice, I'm gonna go ahead and start with 120, then we're gonna go up to 220, and then finally end with 320. After that, you're gonna see me go ahead and put the finish on this board, then we're gonna go 220 and 320 again to knock down that grain, and then we'll put one more coat of finish on the board. For this finish, I'm using the Watco Butcher Block oil finish. This is the first coat, and like I said, we're gonna sand with 220 and 320 and put a second coat on. Also, I'm using a foam brush to put the finish on. I think this applies finish very nicely. I'll link to this in the description. One quick note about applying finish to an end grain cutting board is that it's gonna take a lot more. Remember, the end grain of a wood, it's like a bunch of straws all facing the same direction. And so it's gonna suck that finish in much more. In fact, depending on how the second coat goes on, I may even decide to apply a third coat of finish. Thank you so much for watching this video. If it's been helpful for you, if you could do two things for me. First, hit the like button and then subscribe to the channel. I'm always bringing you more project ideas.